And so the next is Chui Chui Tan. And Chui Chui was born in Malaysia. And she went then, like when she was 15, to the UK. Oh, to Belfast first, and then to Brighton, and then to Bristol, where she is now. So all the Bs. So I guess the next step might be Brisbane. Or maybe not. We'll find out. What's interesting about Chui Chui is that she is really the UX specialist that has this nice background in designing for global audiences. So she's been working with Spotify and Marriott and BBC and Google and Clarks and others. And she speaks 6 languages. And very often when we speak about global experiences, or when we try to maybe translate our brand towards other markets and kind of get that market share there, we just copy the successful model that we have in our country or in other countries, and we just apply it, right? Trying to be a bit more global, kind of going to another country. And it's usually a bit more complicated than that. You can't just take something that already works in one country and apply it as is to another country. So and today she's going to speak about some of the lessons we probably need to know, some of the things that she's learned as designing for global, truly global audiences, so looking beyond the local environment that we usually are designing and building for. So with this in mind, I just would like to kindly ask you to give a very warm hand to one and only Chui Chui Tan.
Hello. Thanks for being here today. And like Vitaly was saying, I'm Chui Chui Tan. You can call me Chui Chui. Either way is fine. Or you can call me Chui. But please don't call me Chui Tan. Because the second one is not middle name. It's part of my first name. So in the last 11 years, I have been working with businesses to help them to not only understand their global customers, but also to create a great experience for them, and also to help them to set up a big, good global strategy so that they can stand out in the crowded market. The markets that I have been covering includes all the continents apart from one, unless there's a company whose customers are emperor penguins or king penguins. The chance of me being able to do a research for penguins experience seems very slim, but I do like that creature. So I wrote a book on international user research as small pocket books, and I'm also editor of one of the most popular magazines, online magazines in the web industry for the last 5 years. And because it's one of the best, so of course it's Smash Magazine. And that is, I believe, it's Bitly. And also I set up and run Beyō Global, a consultancy, which aims to help and empower businesses so that they can provide the best experience for their customers, regardless where they are in the world. Because I believe that a great experience for British, for example, or Americans, might not be a great experience for you or Germans. Or what is good for you probably is not a great experience for Japanese or Brazilians or Middle Easterners. So my background is user or customer experience. But to me, having the end-to-end customer experience without the whole global aspect is already quite a big topic by itself. So you need to make sure that, for example, in the cupcake scenario, you need to make sure it's fluffy. You need to make sure it has a good texture. You have to make sure the sweetness level is good. And you have to make sure that it's actually have a great flavor. So from my experience, the macro level of how people from different backgrounds complete a task normally are the same. For example, how they go about booking holidays or booking hotels or buying a vacuum cleaner. The task or mental model is always the same. For example, you always start with the triggers, like I have a need to travel, and then to a set of requirements, and then to research and then compare hotels or rooms, and then make reservations, and then pay, packing, preparing for the trip, checking in, staying in the hotel, checking out, leaving, and post-travel. So the whole process is very standard, and it's always the same across different countries. But what is different is, what is making one experience better than another for different markets is normally the other layers, the topping. So what kind of set of requirements they have, what are the concerns they have, hence what kind of information you need to provide them on your website, what kind of payment methods are their preferred method, so you can provide them on your website or in the hotels. So all of these are different layers, cupcakes, so you have to understand their taste buds, you have to understand what they like, when they are likely to have this cupcake. Because then you can then choose the right toppings or sprinkles on top of them. And some markets might share some similar the cream or flavored cream, but they want a different sprinkles. But some markets, they might have completely different toppings. So although it seems like there are two layers, the toppings and the cupcake itself, but actually to have a great end-to-end customer experience, both of them have to work very well together. So what I would like you to do now is close your eyes and imagine this. Closing your eyes? So imagine that you are thinking about booking a holiday for your long Christmas break. You came across a company on your Facebook feed. It says package holiday. It's not what you're looking for, but the photos look good. So you click on it anyway, and it brings you to your website. It seems too colorful and overwhelming for your liking, the website. But you click on the calendar and trying to choose the dates. After clicking through the dates, you are confused. Because you remember that Christmas Eve for this year on the 24th of December is on a Monday. But it keeps trying to show you it's 23rd of December. And then you realize, because the calendar starts on Sunday instead of Monday. And you read through and clicking through the copy, and there are a lot of copy that doesn't make sense to you. Maybe it's just bad translations, you think. Finally, you found something that you might be interested in, and you click on it, and then it shows you the price in Japanese yen instead of euro. Let's stop there and open your eyes. How was the experience for you with this website? Frustrated? Confused? How far in would you use this website before you decided to abandon it? So this website, it might be a very popular travel companies in Japan, but the problem is they don't know you. They are German customers. They don't know what you want, what you need, and what you're looking for. Irrelevant content to start with, irrelevant marketing message, bad design, bad translations, and all of this, would you book with them? Probably not. So let's put your product in the middle. Your product could be your website, your app, your software. And then the most important things, the first thing is to identify who your customers are. Are they individuals, or are they couples, parents, or children, or even organizations, or shops, or retailers? Once you understand them, once you identify them, the next step is to understand them. When I say understand, I do mean like properly understand them, like their motivations, their pain points, their behaviors, their goals, their emotions when they're using your products, their journey. Because once you understand that, only then you can actually inform you and make a better good decisions on your products design, for example, and for your marketing strategy, for your business model, and so on and so forth. So it's simple. Understand your customers, identify your customers, understand them, and then make decisions based on what you understand and create a great product. So how do you know what to sprinkle on top of those cupcakes for each market you design so that it becomes a delicious global customer experience? So it comes down to these three elements: market insights, behavioral insight, and cultural insights. So market research is very useful, but the thing is, it lacks of behavioral insights, behavioral elements into it. And cultural insight is very important because that is what is going to drive the behavior of the market or company that the countries that you are designing for. So give you an example. Tanning products is very, very popular and a huge market in the Western countries. But skin whitening products is very huge in Asia. So that is the market trends, right? If you are a cosmetic company, you want to choose the right product to promote in the right markets. But what is the behavior which drive in these market trends? So you will see this when it's hot, everyone's out in the Western countries, right? Everyone wants to get tan. But Asia, this is what happened. They're trying to hide under the shade as much as possible and cover as much as possible. Look at that lady, fear of missing out and fear of getting tanned. So this is the behaviors that drive into the market trends. But what is the cultural insights that drive into this behavior? So it has to go back to the history in Asia many, many years ago. So when you have fair skin, that means that you probably are well off and rich, so that you don't actually have to work under the sun in a paddy field or plantations. And even there's a saying in Chinese that white skin or fair skin can cover a lot of flaws on your face or ugliness. So not long ago, a friend of mine who is Malaysian as well, and he lives in the UK for 6-7 years, and in London, we finally met up after a year and a half. And first thing he told me that he's like, "What happened to you? You look so tan. It looks like you have been working really hard in the paddy field." I just like, you live here. Like, why is this mentality still exist? Whereas in the Western country, I believe the whole tan behavior, notion of being tan is because you have the capability and wealth to be able to go to holidays to get tan. So all this is the cultural insights. There's always a reason why certain behavior of expectations exist. Another quick examples. So in my yoga class in the UK, the instructors always say, "Oh, if anyone can't do this pose, don't worry about it." I was just like, why is it so hard about this pose? And then turned out, I don't know if you tried it before, but I don't know whether you can trying doing this squatting in the future, because turned out a lot of my British friends can't do that. And in Asian, I started to realize there's a reason why we are so good with that, because we are trained to do that since we're young. So this is just a simple example of why there's certain behavior that we have is always going to be influenced by certain things, whether cultural, whether it's the environment or something that make us more familiar with one thing than another. So when we talk about cultural differences in the design aspect, there's always a lot of models that you can use as a reference. So one of the most popular ones is, I'll try to pronounce this, Herert Hofstede, cultural dimensions. How many of you have heard of this model or used this before? There's 1, 2, very slowly like that. So there are 5 dimensions to start with, and then they add another one. And when you look at a lot of articles online and you're trying to Google it, and there are a lot of articles out there to say how you can use this model to design a website. And they're pretty much quite similar. Use the models and one of the dimensions, and then use 2 different websites from different countries, and then come up with a rationale behind why certain things are designed the way they are. And one of the most common websites that people always use is McDonald's website. You have to give credit to McDonald's. They are one of the big companies that, very few companies which very good in culturalizations and adapting to their users' needs, not just on their website, but also their menu and also operations as well. So let's take one article, a snippet of our articles. So this author used Turkish and the American website as an example. And then he took out one of the dimensions, which is the individualism. So it says that because Turkish is very, very much a collectivist society, hence McDonald's are designed the page with a lot of social media buttons and the visual of the cook. And also there's an app download button so that you can download the app to write reviews. Whereas, on the other hand, they say in the US, because it's more individualistic, they only show personal call to actions and so on. But how true is this? Did McDonald's team really came up with this design based on this model? And how accurate is these interpretations of the model as according to this website? Just leave that a second while we try something out. So let's try something here. This is McDonald's for Norwegian's website, right? And Norwegian has a very high masculinity score. So just shout out very quickly, what do you think are the elements that show masculinity on this website that make McDonald's design the way it is? Sorry? Table? Wooden table, masculinity. Why is it coffee? It's a manly thing. Yeah, so there are quite a few of them. But I'm sorry, I might have lied to you. It's actually, Norwegian is a very femininity country. So that is the point that I'm trying to make, is that it's very easy to just take something and then make a rationale behind and say, oh, you designed this and designed that because of this reason and that. And I ran 2 workshops recently on similar topics, and I get the attendees to do something. So I give them, this is a German version, but I gave them the UK versions of the McDonald's website, and I give them all this score, which compare UK at that time and Mexico. And I say, go into your groups and try to design a Mexican website based on these scores. And you can see there's a lot of differences on this, so you can actually create a new design based on that. But the problem is that they find it really, really challenging, and they say it's very subjective in some way, and to a certain extent, it could be quite racist and sexist, and stereotyping as well. So I'm not saying all these models are bad or criticizing them, because they are very useful models. It's just, to me, they are too generalized. It's very hard to apply it practically into your design. For example, if Germany is a very masculine country and Sweden is a very feminine country, and then what? How do you apply that directly to your design or your marketing strategy? And it's very much up to the designer now to interpret that, and it's become subjective, and the interpretations might be wrong. So the point I'm trying to make here is, you can use these models as references, but just be wary about what you read online and trying to validate as much as possible as well. So sometimes there are many reasons why you see certain websites in different countries look a bit different in your eyes. Take Taobao, which is a Chinese marketplace, and very popular marketplace website in China. And it looks to you, probably you say it's quite busy, it's busier than your normal website, and it's more complicated. But is it? So look at this. You probably have come across this already. You can see a young woman, young lady, and also an old lady. And it's the illusions. So can the website that you just saw earlier be busy as well as simple? Let's try this. So this is a UK versions of BBC. Don't worry about content because it's a few years ago. So it looks quite tidy, easy to scan, and looks simple. And this is Indonesian. Still start to look a bit busier, but still easy to navigate and see the content. And it starts to get busier and busier now. And what about this Chinese? Does it look busy and complicated to you? But actually, if you look at the content and the layout, it's actually much simpler than the one you had in the UK versions, if you put it in a wireframe without the content. The reason that people think it's complicated is because they don't understand what they're looking at. So for people who can read Mandarin, this page is absolutely easy to scan because they are consuming the same information that we have if you are put it in the British English version. And very often, like you hear comments as well, people are saying, oh yeah, we are designing for Asian markets. We have to design very busy and colorful because that is what people like. That's what Asians like and prefer and used to. But sometimes it's not completely true. That is what they like. Sometimes because there is some limitation on the design. For example, if you look at the languages which use pictorial, for example, kanji, Mandarin, or to a certain extent, South Korea as well, Korean as well. The web typography is extremely limited because you have to cater, for example, for Chinese, Mandarin, you have to cater for 4,000 characters at least. And also, there's no fancy fonts that you can use to emphasize something or make it italics. And the font size is limited as well, because if it's too small, it makes it really hard to read. And that went across with other languages like Arabic as well. If you squeeze them too much, and all the dots and things start to disappear. So the point here is don't make assumptions on what you see in a high-level sense, because a lot of time what you see is not what you think it is. So it's trying to challenge that, and otherwise you're going to just follow the wrong crowd. So we talk about cultural insight as an element which is really important for global audiences. But culture itself is a big word, right? What is culture? We use it everywhere, like it's culture differences, their culture is so different. Is it based on continents? Like, do you say South Africa, do you say African's culture versus European culture? Or do you use it as countries, like Russian's culture versus South African culture? But what does that mean to people like me, who was born and brought up in Malaysia, following Chinese customs, but have been in the UK for 15 years? Which culture do I belong to? My need, my mentality, my emotion and everything doesn't belong to one country anymore. Or does culture means language, perhaps their mother tongue? Or do you divide culture based on their races, color skin, or ethnic groups? To me, there's no way and there's no point trying to categorize or define culture in such a way. Instead, we should look at what culture consists of. So to me, this is the things that are actually going to influence what a society is going to evolve into, how to shape the society. And I call that influences. They are elements that make up a culture. So when you want to design for a new website, for a local audiences, you need to understand their whole global ecosystem, not just their language, because you might think that actually their economic system set up might influence their behaviors, their legal setting might influence how comfortable they are to provide information, personal information, their infrastructure setup might influence how they use technology in one country. So the question here is, where do you even start to design for global audiences? So there are 3 steps, the essentials. So you have to, before you even start anything, you have to make sure these are right. Does anyone know what is the one thing that these 3 companies share apart from them being international companies? No? Beginning of this year, in January, these 2 companies were having trouble with the Chinese authority because all of them either have listed Tibet or Hong Kong or Taiwan or Macau as a separate country on their website or on their surveys. So some of them have their Chinese website have been suspended, and some of them were just requested to demanded for apologies. So things like that, like geopolitical issues that you don't want to get it wrong because that will bring your business down. Another example is Food Basics. It's a Canadian company, grocery store. They wanted to focus on their ethnic community, the Sikh community. And they came out with this offer and printed flyers that shows all these offers to celebrate Baisakhi festival. But they make a very big mistake. They are offering the halal chicken to them. If their marketing people understand these ethnic groups, that they are target customers, they wouldn't have done this promotion in such a manner. Because first of all, Sikhs doesn't eat meat or alcohol when they're celebrating Baisakhi. And secondly, halal food is actually forbidden by practicing Sikhs. And so it's kind of, if you offer that to them, it's kind of insult to them. So things like that, cultural insensitivity, you definitely don't want to get that right. And let's come back to a closer where we talk about website and digital design. Most of you have pen or pencil, but if you don't have, just imagine this. Just think about just trying to design an icon to represent the dining in Asia. And use a bowl and chopstick in your icon. I'll just give you 15 seconds to think about it or just to draw in your head or on the paper. Right? Something you can idea, right? Does any of this come up? Similar? Yeah? One of these is actually a design from a designers in one of the big hotel company. But little did they know that it's actually they are quite offensive design, because in Asia, in Japan, China, and a lot of other countries, having your chopstick in the bowl is actually feeding your dead ancestors or people who's died. So you definitely don't want to make that kind of small mistake like that. You will say it's just an icon, but this will actually have a backfire on you. So these are the bare minimum that you have to get it right when you're designing for global audiences. Get it wrong, it might actually bring your business down. So you got the essential right. Now next, the basic. So a lot of companies, when they talk about designing for global audiences, they always think about, localizations mean translations. But there's much more to that. So an online travel company that I worked with years ago, they actually spent a lot of money on their Asian market. And one market is Malaysia. And they say they have spent thousands of dollars on tens of thousands of dollars on their site to convert them into Malay languages. And they don't see the increase of sales. And in fact, they see a lot of language switch when they defaulted into Malay language. So in country like Malaysia, actually there are many ethnic groups. So you have Malay, Chinese, Indians, and many more. And we all speak different languages, like Malay, Chinese, Cantonese, Indians, Tamils, and so on. But one thing is this company didn't know is English is very widely spoken in businesses or actually in official correspondence. And in fact, Malaysians are actually very used to using English website for buying things or booking things online. So when you go into a new market, don't rush into translating without making some sort of research, because it might actually cost you a lot of money. Steven Pinker's cognitive scientist and psychologist, he believed that language and thoughts are two different things. Language is used to convey thoughts, and it doesn't shape them. And language is just a tool. That's why people who can't speak, don't have a language, can still think. So words can be interpreted in a different way. So for example, a research that we did with a car manufacturer company. And when we talk about technical specifications with the German users or participants, the things they thought about is the gear power and the horsepower of the engine. But actually in the UK, when you talk about technical specifications, they were thinking about seating capacity and things like that. So the same thing might be actually be translated in a different way. So you can see even translation itself is not straightforward. So when mobile and computers become prevalent, a lot of devices still didn't be able to cope with Arabic languages. So as a result, something has been invented, which is called Arabish or Arabizi. So they actually transliterate the Arabic alphabets into English using Latin script. And there are some words that they don't have a counterpart. Some characters or letters doesn't have counterparts in the Roman Latin script. What they start to use numbers and different special characters. So if you're designing for a Middle Eastern country, and maybe your website, your search page, you search functionality, you might need to have to consider this kind of input using Arabish or Arabizi. So we talk about language. So that's one of basic. And then let's talk about another basic things. So name formatting. You would thought just name. What could be so complicated? So there are a few things. So names order might be different. So in a lot of Asian countries and some European countries, for example, Hungary and Russians, actually first name and last name is the other way around. You start with last name first, yeah, and then first name. Like me, back home, I'm Tan Chui Chui. Here, I'm Chui Chui Tan. So you have to make sure the order or the forms get it right because people normally don't read the label. So then you might actually capture the wrong information and you refer them to the wrong names. And middle names. A lot of countries doesn't have middle names, so you might want to make that as optional. Length, you want to make sure some names is very short, some names could be really long. You want to make sure your box is big enough for people to look at what they have entered if they have a long names. Special characters. So in some countries, for example, in Brazil and Spain, some people have a longer or two last name. So you might want to be able to cater for like dash or something different for these special names like that. And spacing as well. There's so many times. So my name is Chui Chui, right? In Asia, we write it in a space, Chui and Chui, and we can combine it, that's fine. But in my documentations, they always have space. And sometimes when I'm trying to put that, they say, please put in a valid name. That is my name. So it's kind of like things like that. You have to make sure that you cater for that. So this is one of the hotel screen, the hotel room's TV screen. Like when not even get my title wrong, it's like I changed my whole identity. I have a good stay, but I'm not sure about the name being referred, Chui Tan Chui. So that's name itself. So the other things are, for example, numbers. You would thought numbers is just these two formats. What else could it be? So there are a lot, turn out there are a lot of other countries use different ways, and France and Germany use different way, and Mexico use different way as well. So we used to do this for one of our hotels company, so that we came up with a set of design guidelines for their global team. And then numeric and currency display. There's a difference between the two. When do you put the dots and when do you put the commas? And then date as well. Which one first? Year first, date first, or month first? So there are all these considerations. And this is just a quote in an email that one of the clients sent to me. It says, we did tons of research. And the only thing they changed is remove the decimal points in Japanese yen because they actually don't use the decimal points in prices. And especially for hotels companies, and they changed it to kanji, and that saved them a lot of money, and then sales gone up. So small things like that, you would thought is actually nothing, but it's actually driving a lot of sales. And apart from design, like the basic would be the payment method as well. In Germany, for example, credit cards is not as common. In Mexico, people are expecting some installments, even if it's small amount of money. And then in China, they were using Alipay and QR code. And in Japan, you can actually pay money in a cash payment in convenience shops like 7-Elevens, even for domestic flights or hotels. So providing all the right payment method is really important. So all these are basics. So these are just a few examples that you can make it right as well. All this is, to be honest, you could actually do it if you have time to find it from all the secondary research and go online and make sure it's the right information as well. So you have the essentials, you get it right, you get the basic right, and now is the details. Details is what is going to make you be more stand out in a crowd, right? So you know this movie? Yeah, Inside Out from Pixar. So there's this scene that Riley is refused to eat broccoli because it feels disgusted, and a lot of kids find broccoli disgusted. But there's another scene. Can you see the difference? What has changed? The broccoli become green peppers, right? So this scene is actually a Japanese scene. So it turns out they found out that in Japan, kids like broccolis. And they asked them, what is actually gross for you? They say green peppers. So they changed it to green peppers. And that is not the only thing they change. They have changed this from, I think this is a dreaming set, that scene that Riley's dad have when they're having dinner. So some countries, they got hockey. Some countries, they got soccer or footballs. And in fact, they actually localize 28 graphics across 45 different shots to localize for different countries. So that is kind of details what brings you to another level. So for many years, I mentioned Merit for a long time because I worked with them for 8 or 9 years in the past. So as they are global consultants and experts as well. So one of the things, there's one time, instead of trying to do a bit of research here and research there, we decided to actually focus in one country and know it very well. So we start off with China, because that is their biggest market outside the US. And what we did is we did a lot of secondary research, competitive analysis. We also look at the trend. And then we talk to users, and then we come up with a high fidelity prototype, almost functional. And then we test it again, refine it. So out of that research, we have very good set of design that we know it works very well. And on top of that, we came up with 6 very different unique things for that country that we know is not just going to be used for the design of the website, but also their marketing strategy, their business strategy in the future for that market. And then we move on the Spanish-speaking country, which is including Mexico and Spain. What we did this time, we did a similar things, but we used the design we have in China that we created to bring that to test and see how much similarities you can share between the markets and how much you need to change. Because ideally, you don't want to have every single countries have every single differences because you will be mad coding and making changes. Maintenance will be hard. And the things that we find out is 2 things. So one, some functionalities might have to change because package holiday is a big thing in South America, whereas in Spain, it's more about short trips, weekend trips. And so we changed that functionalities. Also, in China, Marriott have a higher brand proposition. So every brand seems to be more luxury. So they have very dark colors for their brand website, but those are too luxury for the Spanish-speaking country. So we have to tone it down slightly. So things like that, it actually make us, inform us how to design brand visual design, as well as functionalities and content. So another example why it is important to provide content that are relevant to your local users on your website is that. So we did research with British medical journals, and when we show an articles or publications to our European participants, the questions they have is what other citations references that this article use. But when we ask Japanese participants, the questions they have is who else actually quote this post, and what other my peers say about this post. So it's all about the information that provided and they look after is look for is very different. But why there is such a difference? So to understand that, you might have to say hi to this guy who died in 2,500 years ago, Confucius, a Chinese philosopher. And his teaching is all about collectivism. So his teaching is actually very popular in a lot of Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Singapore as well. So individualism is negative viewed in collectivist society. There's a Japanese quote, the nail that sticks out have to be hammered down. Because you don't want to be seen very different, you want to blend into with everyone else. And European and Americans very much focus on, emphasize on individual independence, whereas collectivist society very much more focused on interdependence and more sensitive to social context. And neuroscientists, cultural neuroscientists, did a lot of research trying to see the differences between collectivist society and individualistic society, if they think differently. And what they found out is that people don't see things differently, but they think differently. So even they are looking at the same thing, they might be thinking about different things. So that is why people who look for different information on the websites, like we talk about on the British Medical Journal. So you can create as many hypotheses as you want about your customers, about what they want, and so on. So, but you really sometimes have to go out and understand the context of use as well. So years ago, I went to Qatar and do a research for a luxury brand for holiday booking. And we have, in the middle of the sessions, interview sessions, we saw these two guys walk in. Just like, we only recruited one participant, why there are two people? And it turned out the guy on the red top is the assistant. And the guy on the white said, well, you want to know how I'm trying to mimic it, but I'm not really good at that. So they said, you asked me how I go about booking holidays, and this is how I book. So what happened is normally the assistant would sit there, they sit together, the assistant will be doing, and he will be lying there, and if he sees something he wants to comment, he will just point out and come and talk. So that's exactly how they book holidays. And it turned out it's very, very, very common in that regions. So if we didn't go out, we would have just talked to people who book luxury hotels for leisure or business, or talking to their PA, but not in that kind of brotherhood assistant. So things like that will help you to bring you to another level, because then you can go back to your design team and say, oh, this is how they design, and then you have to come up with some functionalities or features to make them easy to use. So in depth, the details. So you need to get the details right. And sometimes this means in-depth interviews, or you might need to get some expert in, or invest a certain amount of money and time to do that. So some of you might have think that this is not really relevant to you, because your products that you design or your company is just in one country, in Germany, so you are not in other markets. But you like it or not, your product is going to be used by people from different backgrounds, whether in your countries, or actually they will use it even you're not in their market. So be open-minded and be willing to challenge as well, be willing to be challenged as well. And like we talked about earlier, examples I showed earlier, try not to just stereotype and follow whatever you see and hear, and just make assumptions and a design decision based on that. And also, follow these 3 steps. So nail the essentials, get the basics right, and focus on the details. Because that is the journey for you to start in a very, very crowded market. And this is how you're going to be on top of your ladder. So enjoy your journey in designing the best experience that you could give to your local customers. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So would you like to join me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's always interesting. So when we're designing, it's always kind of plausible to think, okay, so let's just get our version right, and then we can explore other markets. But how would you actually go around? That's a question coming from the audience. How would you go around and like trying to get a grasp of understanding foreign markets? Or specifically, what is the best way for a middle-sized company to get the understanding of foreign markets? Is it always a safe bet to hire an agency in the country, or would you do something else?
Yeah. So it's really depending on the budget and timeline you have, as always, because, like, research approach, I don't know why I'm holding this, but the research approach could be, there are so many different research approaches. So some might be cheaper than another and quicker than another, but there are always pros and cons, right? So if you have enough budget, then sure, like I say, go into the details, have in-depth interview with the users. But if not, sometimes it's just understand like I say, the desk research and things like that would be good. Or sometimes you don't even have to go there and talk to them. You can do remote research as well with them, like having a screen share with them, and then call the participants and talk them through and get some understanding. The most important thing is talk to your customers, right? Because ultimately you're designing for them, and they are the one they're going to define and decide whether your product is going to be successful. So talk to them any information that you can get from them is useful. But you talk about having local partners to do that. And of course, they speak the language. They probably know the market a lot more. But also, there's a danger of that as well, because more and more clients come to me as well that they could go straight to Russia or Japan, but actually they come to me, and I always will work with a local team as well. But it's us managing what we want to find out, how we're going to find those information, how we interpret informations. They are just there to do the groundwork. The reason for that is because a lot of time when the local agencies, because a lot of things they find, sometimes they can find things that are very normal to them, but actually it's really important to international companies to understand. So they might not pick that out very easily. So it's really important to have that kind of knowledge, a global view, in order to say, okay, this sounds very common here, but it's actually really important because it differentiates from one market to another, or we can do something about it.
Yeah, it's actually also very interesting because when we try to look into maybe having a smashing conf somewhere in Asia or so, it doesn't matter where we go beyond the scope of North America and Europe. We were always told that it's really a good idea to have somebody local on the ground. So it's not seen as being kind of cool to come as a Western company to another country, to another continent. Even although they might know the brand, just because you really need to work around creating some sort of a local environment for that company to kind of flourish there, right? So it's not necessarily just about the design, but also creating this sense of awareness of the brand in local terms, right? So
and especially in Asia, because they are very much about relationships in a lot of countries. So it's like, having a local people who can speak the language actually will help.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So would you say that if you're looking into creating a multilingual experience, at some point you have to start somewhere. So there are always extremes. So if you look into Chinese, like Mandarin, some words or sentences can be very short. If you look into German, some sentences and words can be very long. And then you have English. So when you start designing, will you look into the extremes, very short languages, I mean, on average, or very lengthy? Or would you go into the mainstream and look into English first? Or do you need to look into all this three? Because, you know, the width of the containers, I don't know, the layout, all of this kind of heavily influenced by the language as well, right?
Yeah, you're right. So a lot of time when we advise our clients when they design from English, because like a lot of American or British company, we will say actually make sure that you leave 35% longer for German and Dutch. To be able to fit into that design. It's always a case of having white space because you have less character is better than you squeeze and you overlap characters, right? So we will always consider to have enough space for longer versions of languages. And even you say, okay, we can't have one line, make sure you have space in the bottom or you wrap the text and things like that. And make sure it wraps in the right way as well. You don't want to just cut it off in the wrong way. So I think the short answer is go for the long ones and then make sure when you design, you have this global sense in your back in your mind to make sure that in the future when you expand into new market, it's not going to create a problem.
Right.
Because a lot of companies that say, oh, we're not ready yet, come back when we are ready. But I just said, no, now you have to start already when you start designing. You should start designing with a global in mind.
Because very often when we start building or designing today, it's always about design systems and components, and we compartmentalize the entire interface. But then the question for me still is, so when we're creating those design systems, can they really be flexible enough to support multilingual experiences or like multicultural experiences? Can we really build up a design system that would be flexible enough to accommodate for everything, short languages, long languages, and so on and so forth? Or do you see websites still being very, very different? I mean, even if you look at the color scheme, so we have the red color. That's a dangerous color to use, right? I was told in Asia. So would you say that you often would have very different color schemes? not only layouts and typography, but also very different visual expression of the brand in different countries. So McDonald's is red. Is it red everywhere? It probably is, right? So is it kind of still quite aligned with the brand, or do you see very different expressions of the brand as they travel around the world?
I think it's really depending on the brands as well. So I think ultimately, we work with businesses, companies before where let's say they have 20 brands, 20 countries. So they might have 12 or 15 of them quite similar to each other. Europeans or some Southeast Asia companies looks quite similar design, but they actually, and then the design with the components where you talk about, they code it in the way that they can share with each other. But then they have a few very different countries that they have completely different design. That is because their brand proposition is completely different in that countries, or they want to appear in a very different way in a certain countries. In that sense, you might have a bit different color scheme for certain countries. And in terms of the
visual, the aesthetics.
The visual as well as the coding. So the coding, you could have one coding components for a few countries like we talked about. And then a lot of companies, what they do is for languages which is not Latin scripts, they will build another one just for that, like the pictorial type of or non-Latin script. So they have a different set of components to support that.
Okay. So we have a very philosophical question. Are you ready for this one?
Bring it on.
Okay. So we have somebody asking, so do you agree with Steven Pinker quote that language does not shape thought? How do you think about something you do not have a word for? There is actually evidence that language does shape thought, for example, how gender is used and how important it is in a language. So
yeah, no, I do agree with that. When I was reading that quote, it's funny because 2 weeks ago, there's I think the podcast is called Hidden Brain. I like the podcast. It's talking about languages, how people shape how we think. And I do believe that because I used to think in my dreams in Mandarin, and now I think in English. So it does change your mind quite a lot in that sense. So yeah, it's funny, that podcast, Steven Pinker was on it. So he was, I think he's trying to make the sense that actually it doesn't shape it in a way that completely, it's a tool, but also it doesn't shape it in the way that change the way you think, but it changed how to say it. So he actually say let me rephrase it. So he was saying it doesn't change the way you think, but it's actually changed the way you present
your thoughts?
What you want to say. Yeah. I would actually, I know
That's
it's
very
not
deep. This goes.
That's why it's just like, who asked that question?
Who asked that question?
You. I would actually suggest you to listen to a Hidden Brain podcast. One of them is called Language or something like that. It's really, they talk about languages, how people shape, how languages in different countries or countries that doesn't have left or right, how they navigate, because they navigate based on where you are, like east or west and north and south. So you don't say hi. You actually, when you see people, you don't say hi. You actually say where you're going. So you have to be able to navigate yourself. For me, I would be crap because my navigation is really bad. So instead of saying hi, how are you, have eaten? They will say, hi, where are you going? So you have to say, I'm going south of where I am now. And then when you turn, I'm going north of where I'm going. So it's that kind of countries, and when the language doesn't have a directional, the way they think is a bit different. But I do agree with you. There's some kind of contradicting between the two.
Yeah, I remember vividly my first time in Tokyo. That was something. So I got the address of a hotel.
Yeah.
And I was just giving it to the taxi driver, and he would look at me and stare. I was like, I was really scared for a second. What does it mean? Like, why? And apparently I was supposed to say, like, what district or what area we're going to first. And I had no idea. So I tried English, and that didn't work. So he tried Japanese. That didn't work. So I tried to write on the pen, and I knew that there is this tower the very famous like the TV tower there, and so I drew it on the paper, and I showed it to him. I was like, "You want tower?" I'm like, "Tower, that's enough. Tower is good enough for me."
Get me to
so
the tower
he
and then
brought me
walk.
to the tower. That was actually quite helpful
Yeah.
already. I had to walk like half an hour.
Half an hour.
That's like, but I was close.
Get
I
you to
mean,
the tower.
I was close enough. That's not too
Yeah,
bad with
yeah.
my luggage and stuff. Okay, why am I? Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter. Okay, so thank you so much.
No, thank
Chui Chui.
you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Thank you.